Hey everybody, I would say welcome back, but I feel like I need to say I'm back because I've been gone for a little bit. And it's good to be back, and it's good to start recording some more videos for you guys. You guys have been asking me for it, want to know when some more videos are going to be released. I'm sorry, I didn't shoot any videos leading up to my trip, and then I was gone for 9 days, and I just didn't have any material prepared for you guys. So I apologize for all that, but we're back, and thanks for tuning in on this episode. This is going to be a good episode. I'm really going to talk about some cool stuff here. And the trip, I went to Kentucky. I went to compete in the Masters Track and Field National Championships, which was a lot of fun. And I wound up getting the bronze medal in the 100 meter, and my 4x100 relay team took home the gold. In fact, we were, I think, about 0.7 of a second off the American record and 0.9 of a second off the world record. So not bad considering we've never run together before, and we practiced our handoffs about 5 minutes before we started. So that was great. That was a lot of fun. Unfortunately, they're having to mail the medals out to all the relay participants, so I don't have my gold medal here to show you, but that'll be in soon. And then I did a little business trip, and then I wound up going from Kentucky into Tennessee, and I visited my daughter and my grandkids, and we spent a couple of days with the grandkids. There's a lot of driving, but it was a nice getaway and a good trip. So now I'm back, and I want to talk to you guys about all the things that we put into a speaker and the things that go into a speaker that make or break soundstage, imaging, soundstage layering, soundstage width, everything involving creating a three-dimensional soundstage. And that's something we shoot for in just about every speaker that we do, and we've spent tons of time tweaking and working with various aspects of a speaker that make improvements in those areas. And today I'm going to kind of give away the farm, and I'm going to talk about a lot of that stuff that we do that makes huge improvements in those areas. And I made a few notes this time. I normally don't write any notes. I just start talking. But I wanted to kind of stay on point this time a little bit and cover this specific information. So we're going to talk about all that stuff. We're going to talk about the little XLS Encore as an example. We're going to talk about some of the reviews that have just come out on this thing, which were fantastic. And we're going to talk about trade-offs that we have to make when we're designing a speaker like this. So, but let's start with some easy to understand stuff. Let's start with settling time and stored energy. And this can be drivers, and we're going to start with drivers. It can be cabinets, it can be crossover parts, but we're going to talk about settling time. And let's look at specifically the woofer. And I love this little woofer of ours. And it's a polymer chassis, which is non-resonant. Love it. It's the best chassis there is out there. This particular model has a lightweight paper cone, and there's some trade-offs there. And of course, there has to be trade-offs when you're designing a speaker like this. It's a box speaker. It's not like the Extremes behind us that have no limitations. Cost was not a limitation. Nothing involving any aspect was a limiting factor. It has high sensitivity. It has great dynamics. It's full open baffle. It's completely transparent in the way it sounds. It's got servo subs alongside it. It's flat to 20 hertz. It's easy to drive. It's an unbelievable speaker. When you listen to it, you really don't hear sound coming from the speaker. You hear a three-dimensional sound field where things are all layered and positioned within the soundstage. That's great, but you can't do that in a box speaker without making some trade-offs. You have to go all in one direction. You have to sometimes give up in one of the directions. And the woofer is that way a little bit in that it's a lightweight paper cone. By lightweight, I mean 9 ounces of moving mass. Not 9 ounces. 9 grams of moving mass. Pretty lightweight compared to some of the woofers that we've used from SB Acoustics that we used in the Tyler Acoustics Timekeeper. Similar woofers also used in the Bucard audio speaker, their latest model. Good all-around woofers. Heavier, stiffer cone, better at going all the way down to a lower frequency range and up through the mid-range. Where a heavier cone gives out is when you get above 1,000 hertz. It's not going to have the speed and resolution. In fact, some of the heavier cones are going to give up just outside of the mid-range, like the woofer that was used in the Creative Sound Solutions model that Jay A-B'd against the Encore in one of his latest videos. That thing has a moving mass of 21.9 grams, almost 22 grams of moving mass versus 9 grams of moving mass. So what does that mean? Well, it's a trade-off. If you were only playing frequency range from 100, maybe 80 hertz on down, the woofer that's in the Creative Sound Solutions model is a better woofer. If you're looking for speed, resolution, and faster settling time and a cleaner sound, the M165 and the XLS Encore here is a better solution. So it's trading things off. When you have a lighter weight moving mass, you have less energy in motion. In other words, that heavy mass gets put into motion, it takes longer for it to settle. Lightweight mass like this, as you put it into motion, there's less stored energy there, it settles very quickly. Kind of like the little 3-inch driver in our little giant killer here, the little LGK 2.0. 2.5 grams of moving mass. This thing is really lightweight. Settles super fast, super clean. Vocals in this thing are phenomenal, beautiful sounding, really, really clean. Limitation. Only has a 1 millimeter X max, and there's not a lot of surface area here. So if you start sending a lot of low frequency signal through it real hard, you'll bottom it out immediately. It's completely out of control. So you're giving up low end extension in order to get speed, clarity, resolution, detail, things like that. Same way with any woofer. We're giving up a little bit to make gains in another area. And we feel like this is a good area to give up low end extension because it's a mini monitor. What do I mean by that? Ideally, if you're listening to a pair of mini monitors, most people don't just want a pair of mini monitors to do everything, like to play full range, to play down to the low frequency range. That they're just not going to do that real effectively. It's a small driver. So give that up a little bit and let it do everything else better, and then let that lower range be covered by a more capable driver. Use one of our servo-controlled woofers down low. Even better, use one of these with that speaker. This is an inline filter. What this inline filter is doing is it's got an input on one side and output on the other, and it's got a bypass on one side. In this case, it's got a 0.047 microfarad Sonocat Platinum in the middle. Really good quality cap. So you plug this into the amplifier, you plug your RCA in on this end. What it does is it limits the low frequency. It's just a high-pass filter. So this thing never sees those first octaves. If you're relieving it of the first octave, cone excursion is cut in half. Headroom of your amplifier goes up. Makes it easier to drive, lower distortion across the board because it's not even having to do those low frequencies. Huge bonus. It sounds even better when you do those things. And then let a woofer do the bottom end. I can remember we would go to the shows, and Rocky Mountain Audio Fest is a great example. All the rooms, the smaller rooms, were 19 feet by 13 feet. And most of them caused a huge bass hump at about 50 hertz. And so we knew that going in. We had been in those rooms many times before. And we could go in with a mini monitor and roll that bottom end off, so it's rolling off before that range, and then put the servo subs in there and play the very bottom range, and we'd make a little bit of a troughed area right there where there's a room peak and balance the response right out. I remember going in one year after we moved to a big room. Rado had our old room, which was one of those 13 by 19 rooms, and they had a $18,000 pair of mini monitors, which is a really good mini monitor. Those things sound fantastic. But they had a huge peak at 50 hertz in that room. I mean, overwhelming boominess, and you just couldn't get past it. As soon as you sat out in there, it was just boom, 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 boom. What do you think of the speakers? Well, I think you got a huge bass hump at 50 hertz. Oh, yeah. What about the rest of it? I can't get past that, It's just boom, 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 boom. So when you separate those things and you give up that bottom end, you have a ton of flexibility. You can balance out your room a lot better. Put the speakers where they image best, not where they're going to have the most bass in the room. pull those speakers out into the room. Then they're going to give you a greater sense of soundstage and layering and things. And that's typical of our customers. I know Jay, when I suggested it to him, he thought that was really extreme, bringing them out that far. No, that's really common. And they're not designed to be moved 5 feet out in the room. These are a very versatile speaker. They can be used in a lot of applications. You can use them as rear surrounds. You can use them as your front 3 in a home theater. You can use them just in 2-channel speakers, small rooms. You can put them a foot off the wall, 6 inches off the wall. You can bring them 5 feet out into the room, and then they will show you what they can do, especially if you've opted for a bunch of these upgrades that we offer with these things. There's huge improvements there. So they will reward you when you move them things out into the room. So let's talk about some other things that affect imaging and soundstage layering. Baffle size, surface area of that baffle, and diffraction. Those are huge things. The bigger the baffle gets around the drivers, the more surface reflection you have off of that baffle, and the more attention it draws to itself and says, here I am. I'm the speaker. It draws your attention right to it because the sound is reflecting off of it in such a broad area. When you minimize the surface area around the drivers, you minimize the reflective surface, it becomes more transparent and more three-dimensional. Same goes with the sides. When you radius the sides, the diffraction tends to reflect off in a wide angle instead of at a sharp angle. If you have sharp corners on the speaker, that's gonna hurt it as well. It's going to cause diffraction that's going to draw attention to itself. Next thing, cabinet resonances can really, really hurt your imaging. If the cabinet is resonating, it can be out of phase with the drivers. It can knock some of your output away, and it can disrupt the sound field. Typically, we'll sell our kits with sheets of no-res. This one's lined with no-res, and dense and dead sounding. And it does away with those cabinet resonances, which can really eat up your imaging and your soundstage layering. Another thing, connectors and the wiring and stuff that's used in a speaker. The quality of the wire can really make a difference. The quality of the connectors, when you start using binding posts, any of that stuff that you have in the signal path is going to have some effect on the signal transfer. When you replace stuff like this with products like tube connectors, where you have minimal loss of the original signal, because you basically just have a hollow copper tube there, and you've got a male plug and an internal wire that's like this. It's tip to tip, just surrounded by a copper tube. That's a lot better at allowing a clean signal transfer than a lot of your binding posts, and it really affects the imaging and the soundstage layering. Proof is in the pudding. I mean, it's clear to hear. You start replacing those things, you add clarity, detail, a lot of those things come into play. Crossover parts. Whew, this one's huge. Crossover parts have a big effect on your imaging and your soundstage layering. Let's look at capacitors for one. 10 microfarad electrolytic capacitor. This is your cheesy stuff. This is the 50-cent cap, and it stores energy. In other words, energy enters, it holds it, and then it releases it. It's a very slow discharge. It tends to smear that signal. It ruins your spatial cues and things that create that open, airy soundstage. And you never want these in a high-end speaker at all. Next up, just polycaps. Here's an Ursi and a Solon polycap. These are a higher quality polycap. They're inexpensive. They're faster in the way they discharge. They sound pretty clean. Stepping up hugely, Sonicaps, completely different in the way that they're made, other than it's still a polycap. Differences in the way the ends are terminated, differences in the thickness of the film, the type of film, how wide versus how short the film is, and the conductive material that's used. All of those things have an effect on the signal transfer from one side of this to the other side of this, and how clean it is, how clear it is, and how well it maintains those spatial cues. There can be big differences in those areas. Another trick that we do is we use bypass caps. Often in the tweeter circuit, this is a little Gen 3 sonic cap. You can bypass a regular sonic cap with this thing, and these little caps discharge really fast, and it reduces smearing. It basically is shorting the stored energy of the larger cap. So it's discharging that a little faster. And it tends to take on the sound of the bypass cap. Another thing we use commonly, the MyFlex 0.1 microfarad bypass caps. We use those as an option. They're a little more expensive, but they're very lush sounding, but very fast, very clean sounding. And we use those a lot of times in conjunction with the sonic caps in top level applications. Copper foil is bigger because they can only squeeze copper foil so thin before it starts breaking. So they can't make it super thin. So it gets heavy and it gets big. But the differences in that stuff, wow. Differences in imaging, layering, soundstage, just completely different. And a lot of times we'll have something set up and we'll drop one of these caps on and off the circuit and compare it to a different type of cap and listen to the differences. And we spend thousands of hours listening and comparing everything and listening to what effect does it have in the soundstage. What happened to the soundstage when we switch this stuff out? And that's how we learn a lot of these tricks on how to make something have better imaging and better soundstage layering and all that good stuff. So Jay did some video reviews of this thing recently, and I want to really compliment him on how great a job that he did with that stuff. I'm actually really proud of him. He's actually listening, and he's setting the speakers up in a way to where he can hear what we've put into it. And that's what I look for in a reviewer. I want these guys to be able to hear all of the work and all the effort that we've put into something to make it what it is, so that they can report to you guys and say, it's this or it's that. And Jay, and he brought in a buddy that's a musician. They compared this to a $10,000 Sonus Faber speaker, and it was a great speaker. And they were specifically listening for the tonality. They like tone. In fact, Jay will tell you, and he mentioned in one of the other videos, he's all about tone, tone, tone. And that's okay. I mean, there's people who specifically listen and like certain things. There's guys that will listen to horn speakers primarily because they like huge dynamics, and they're willing to give up a smooth frequency response or a level of accuracy or a level of imaging because they just want big dynamics. There's nothing wrong with that. I don't have any problem with anybody having preferences for one thing over another thing. What I'm interested in when somebody's reviewing a product is, are you hearing what we've done? And can you give the feedback on what you're hearing? And in this case, Jay did a fantastic job. So did his buddy. They may have liked the sound of the Sonus Faber better, but what they did have to say about the Encore was it had better imaging, soundstage layering, the soundstage was deeper, wider, things like that.
Mm. But the separation of the sounds with this one was very impressive for the price. You know, I think if you compare some speakers at the same price, let's say 1,000 Canadian dollars, honestly, it's impressive.
The GR Research speakers I liked better with the sound staging and imaging and separation capabilities. It was on par with the Sonus Fabers on most part, and even on some tracks, it was even better than the Sonus Fabers. It had a wider sound stage, deeper sound stage, better separation on some tracks.
I thought that was fantastic. They nailed it, and it should be because of the quality of the parts that were in that speaker. For instance, the $10,000 Sonus Faber speaker had little air core inductors. It had clarity caps, good capacitors. It had Mundorf resistors, so it had good quality parts, really good quality parts. But the little Encore that they had great quality parts. It had foil inductors. It had sonic caps, which is even better than the clarity cap. It had copper full bypass caps. It had Mills resistors. It had pretty cream of the crop parts in it, and those parts should make differences compared to the parts that were used in the Sonus Faber as far as imaging and soundstage layering and things like that. It's preserving those spatial cues and things that are there in the input signal and allowing those to be reproduced in a way to where that stuff's not disrupted. So even if you're all about tone, tone is a variable in my mind. When a customer buys one of our kits, you can make the speaker have any tone that you want. I mean, if the customer came to me and said, "All right, I got these built, Danny, but I want, you know, I'm in a room that's really bright and highly reflective, and in that room the tweeter's just a little too much. Can I bring it down?" Absolutely. I can send out a resistor, maybe a couple of resistors that you can change out that can bring the levels down. In fact, with the way this crossover is designed, there's a resistor at the front, at the end, and one in shunt. So there's 3 resistors. And by manipulating those, you can raise the tweeter level up, you can raise it down, you can tilt the lowest frequency range down while leaving the top up, or you can bring it up, you can tilt the top up or down, you can make it have any tonal balance that you want. You can have it have a BBC dip. You can do anything with these things to change the tonality. In fact, you can go in and you can get EQ on stuff, go in with some of the software like Pure Music, and you can type in different filters in there to where you can boost or you can attenuate different frequencies, and you can make it have any tonal balance that you want. But none of that stuff will improve a speaker's imaging and soundstage layering and the 3-dimensionality of the soundstage. You're never going to fix any of those things or manipulate any of those things by changing the speaker's tone. I have guys that look at upgrades that we've done to various speakers that are sent in. They're saying, yeah, I can see how you smoothed out the frequency response. Well, we can just do that with EQ. You can smooth out the frequency response with EQ, but that won't make it sound better. It's still going to have the same smearing effect that it had to begin with the cheap parts that were in there. You're not going to have the layering of the soundstage and the placement of instruments and all that stuff by going in and EQing it. That's not going to do it. It's only when you go in and you use higher quality parts, you do away with cabinet resonances, you've got fast settling times, you've got a preservation of the original input signal. Now you're getting into an area where you've got really good layering and spatial cues that are there and create a 3-dimensional sound field. And you're not going to get that with EQ or shifting the tonal balance of a speaker in some way. Just not going to happen. So next, Jay did a comparison with the Encore and the Creative Sound Solution speaker, which I thought was also great. You learn tons of stuff when you start doing comparisons. We do comparisons all the time. I love it. Love doing comparisons. And so, again, it's a very different kind of speaker. It's a speaker with a heavy moving mass in the woofer. Should it have better bass? Absolutely, it should have better bass. In fact, I think the tonality of that is kind of shifted to the bottom end. It's a heavy bottom end speaker. This one, if a customer wants a little deeper bass extension, they can build the version called the XSLS, which is a small floor standing version, which puts this woofer in optimal airspace. And optimal airspace for this woofer is 1 cubic foot. In that 1 cubic foot at 3 dB downs at 45 hertz. So it plays down fairly low. And it has a nice smooth roll off at the bottom end and just rolls off nice and smooth curve. This box stuffs it in half of that airspace, half a cubic foot, and it's tuned higher. So what happens is the bass has about a half dB rise at the very bottom, and then it drops rather sharply, and it's 3 dB down at 55. So it's a little different in the way that it's loaded. And if you compare it to a speaker like the Creative Sound Solutions model, which is designed to have really good bass, you're going to notice maybe that has better bass on its own. Whereas what we're offering, we're willing to give that up. We may even recommend you put a filter in to even remove more bass. Let your subwoofer do that. We're focusing this thing in other areas. We're trying to create a better listening environment, a better listening experience. And when Jay and his buddy compared the two speakers, Jay still focused pretty much on tonality. Nothing wrong with that. And he tended to lean towards the Creative Sound Solutions model.
Tone. How many times do I have to say tone, 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 tone? That's what's important to me, tone. So, tone-wise is the reason why I chose the CSS audio majority of the time. Majority of these listening sessions, by the way, I look for tone.
Whereas his buddy began to focus more on the sound stages and the imaging, which was, according to those guys, significantly better with the XLS Encore than what they were hearing with the Creative Sound Solution speakers.
I kept going towards the GR research, I think, because there was a depth there that the CSS audio didn't have. And in that depth, I kind of noticed that when there was multiple vocals and instruments and things stacking on, I really could tell, the imaging and everything, where it was standing in relation to the sound and in relation to myself. So I feel like it was really precise in that sense. And fairly neutral, not too much of a bass boost, which I kind of associate to this, to the CSS. There was a very big bass presence on there.
But I have to say that even though the GR research, I could definitely sense that it was deeper in Soundstage. I agree with you there. But the tracks that I played that differed from your tracks were mostly string instruments. And I felt like when I listened to it, I enjoyed more of the presentation of the CSS audio, even though it didn't have as much of a deep soundstage. Both of these have deep sound stages, by the way, but the GR research, exceptional depth. Like far.
And they did do what I asked Jay to do. Again, I told Jay after he had done the review with us on his favor, and they mentioned the soundstage and imaging was better in the Encore. I thought, well, it would really be a lot better if it wasn't 1.5 feet off the wall. Bring those things 4 or 5 feet out in the room and then hear what they do. So that was a message that I sent him. You know, try that. He not only tried it, but he set up a speaker comparison with him that far out into the room, and he heard exactly what he should have heard and what he reported. He reported exactly what he heard, and I really appreciate that. He admitted the soundstage, layering, imaging, it was exactly what we've designed it to be, and it excelled in those areas, and I really appreciate that. And I appreciate Jay and his journey that he's on. It's fun for me to watch somebody on their journey and realizing new things and to talk about things like that and to convey what he's hearing. He did a great job. So all of this to bring you to another point, and it's very important. Once you have a system set up to where you're really recreating that three-dimensional soundstage, things are layered, things are everywhere. You can tell differences in space between instruments and things like that. Now, when you start swapping in power cables, when you start changing interconnect, when you start changing speaker cables, now you're really going to start noticing what those things bring to the table. Because when you start changing out a power cable or an interconnect or speaker cables, you're not going to change the tonality of a speaker. The frequency response is still going to be exactly the same. It's not going to boost the bass or boost the treble or something because you've changed cables. What's it doing then? It's, in this case, a lot of times it's removing noise that's in the system because the cable has become a bit of a filter for a lot of that high frequency noise. So when you remove that from the signal paths, you hear that in the soundstage. It's like, well, I heard somebody the other day say whenever they swap in a power cable, the whole soundstage opened up. Yeah, that's the effect. That's very common. People say that a lot. You go to one of our power cables, the whole soundstage opens up. Absolutely. And if you have something set up to where the speakers are far out into the room and you've created that three-dimensional sound field, you hear it real easily, very easily. If you have the speakers against the wall, and especially if you don't have any room treatment, you got a bare wall, you're not recreating that three-dimensional sound field. You're never going to hear it. You're never going to hear a lot of the differences in power cables or speaker cables or interconnects or USB cables. All of that stuff makes a huge difference, and you're never going to hear it if you don't have a system set up to where you're recreating that type of a sound field. And that was one of the reasons I was critical of a lot of the new YouTube reviewers out there, because the way they've got some of the review systems set up, they're not recreating a three-dimensional soundstage. Some of them have speakers in an empty room with a hardwood floor and a bare wall across the back. They're never going to hear any of that we've put into this speaker, and they're never going to hear differences in cables and things like that. So they're going to be on the side of the fence, basically, that says none of that stuff matters. To them, it won't matter because they're not recreating it. That's why in a video months back, I said a lot of those young YouTube reviewers, they're not ready to review our products. And what I meant was they're not just not ready to review our products, not ready to review really high-end products, because they're not in a situation where they can hear those things within the soundstage. When you get to a point where you're actually recreating that soundstage, now you're going to hear those differences. Now those differences are going to be worthwhile, and you can easily hear them. Our customers report it back all the time. So I know this was a long one, and I appreciate you guys sticking with me. Hopefully you learned a little bit in this video. I feel like I kind of gave the farm away a little bit. There's still a lot of things that we don't give away, but I did give away a lot, and I hope it helped you guys, and I hope it helps you move further along on your journey to creating better sound for you and your system. That's it for this video. See you guys in the next one.